This is Pete from Spawn Fly Fish. We're here to jam out just a tiny little nymph that'll catch fish no matter where you go. But I do have a request, and that would be that you'd hit like and subscribe when we're done watching this video. Thanks so much. All right, everybody, so today we're just tying a basic little nymph that doesn't match any specific bug, but kind of matches all the bugs in general. So we're starting off with the Ahrex SA280, and this is a size 8. And for the bead, we're using the Mottled tungsten bead from Hareline. And this one is the orange in the 5/32 inch size. For a little wire, I'm gonna toss some .015 non-lead wire on there. And I want about 8 wraps. This isn't gonna add a lot of weight for us. It's just gonna give us a nice stopping point for the difference between abdomen and thorax, if you will. So there's about 8 wraps. And if you want your scissors to last a really long time, don't use your good scissors to cut wires. Use a cuticle scissor, just one that's dedicated for cutting and trimming wire. Save those expensive ones for your thread and hair. All right, once we get those edges curved a little, just slip that into the back side of that bead and it won't be going anywhere. And now for our thread, we got some Uni 6/0, and the color of this one is camel. So what we're gonna do is start our thread right behind where we added our wire wraps. Get that down a little, go ahead and trim the tag end of your thread. And then we're gonna wrap down these weighted wire wraps. Just make sure you don't have any sharp edges. There we go. And as we come back to the wire, remember we're gonna go angled 45-degree angle wraps, both forward and back, a couple passes. And then as we come through with our parallel wraps, it'll cinch those down into the wire and really hold it tight. All right, so we're not gonna use a tail on this fly. We just want something that looks like it could be hatching or has just a little bit of subtle movement toward the bead. And again, this bead is gonna act as our hot spot and really get us noticed. So for the first step, let's tie in a little strip of thin skin. And for this thin skin, we're using the tan with black speckles. And as you can see, it is roughly the size of the bead, maybe just a touch wider than the bead itself. So we're gonna go ahead and tie that in right the base of where we finished our weighted wire wraps, and tie that down. We're gonna go past the curve here a little bit and not stay just on the flat portion of the hook shank. Come back up, make sure everything is tied down nice and tight. Our next step, we're gonna add just a little bit of some copper wire, and this is size brassy. So we'll cut about a 4-inch piece here. And just so you can see a little bit better, I'll try to tie it in on your side. And there we go, we catch it, and let's keep it running right down the side of that buggy body, all the way back to where we tied in our thin skin. And come back up. Make sure our underbody of this fly, just like any fly you tie, is nice and even. All right, so I'm gonna come back here to where our weighted wire stops. And what this will do is give us a little guide for the length of our abdomen. And then that little spot behind the bead is gonna give us the right amount of room for our thorax. And it's just something to keep in mind when you're tying nymphs or any small bugs. You want roughly 2/3 of your hook shank to be utilized for that abdomen, and then 1/3 for that thorax. And so for the abdomen, we're just gonna use some Simi seal and Cranefly tan. And we're gonna dub enough of this onto our thread that we're gonna actually dub back to the tie-in of our thin skin and wire, and then come back to our starting point. And that'll give us just a little bit of a meatier body instead of having it super thin. Again, we're not going for any specific bug here, we're just going for a general attractor type nymph. All right, that should get us down and back. We're not working on anything huge here. So we're gonna start, we're gonna work back to the curve here, and now just wrap right over itself all the way back to where we started. And these little bits of Simi seal in here, you can either rip them or just kind of leave them as they are for that extra little bugginess effect. All right, so now that we've done the abdomen portion that's gonna get dubbed, let's bring our thin skin over, and we'll tie that down so that it stays on top of the shank and doesn't slip to your side or to my side, either one. We just want it right on top to go over that dubbing, and this will look like the natural shell or carapace of a regular bug. So we've got a few wraps here. Now at this point you can cut out the thin skin and trim that, but I like to leave it on so that as I wrap my ribbing wire, if something were to slip, I can undo the wire and still fix that. If I cut it now and something slips, then I'm not gonna have a chance to manipulate this anymore. So let's just take a couple wraps and see how it goes. And again, when we start this wire, if we wiggle that wire just gently before we get through to the top, we're not gonna stick all those fibers against each other. We're gonna let it move a little bit more naturally and get that desired effect. So just evenly spaced, we're gonna be looking at probably 3 or 4 wraps here. And there's 3, we got one more to get to the 4th wrap. And you can see if we just keep those evenly spaced on top, nothing crazy, right? And now we've got our 5th wrap. Let's go ahead and tie that off there. So there's, give it a few nice holds there, and bring this wire back toward the tail before we cut, so that that little bit of tag end here will get tied down and really solidify our wire. Nothing's gonna move or jump because we've tied it in and reversed it now. All right, looks pretty buggy. So what we've got now is just enough room to create our thorax, but let's go ahead and get in there with our scissors and cut that tag end of the thin skin out. And now for our thorax, we're gonna go very simple, but we're gonna give it the illusion again of that nymph type behavior where there's possibly something hatching, or is, you know, going from a larva to a pupa, or from pupa stage to adult. And for that, we're gonna use some CDC, and this is Hareline CDC, and it's just, they're brown, so nothing crazy here. And we're gonna trim out some of the top fibers of this feather here that are a little bit short, maybe don't fit in with what we're looking for. We're looking to utilize this range here where they're a little bit more uniform. So just trim out some of these fibers at the tip of the feather, and this little area is what we'll use for our tie-in. So go ahead and get these ready. All right. Now what we're gonna do is tie this in over the hook eye, so that after we put in our dubbing for our little thorax, we'll actually bring this back and wrap this way, and it'll give us better coverage. Trim out one more fiber there. All right. So again, we're gonna place the convex or top side of this feather against our thorax, and a little bit more gentle than your normal wraps to get this started, because if you crimp down too hard on this quill, it will break, and by the time you finish dubbing your thorax and you begin to wrap, you'll just have a broken feather. So after a few wraps, let's trim out the tag end of our feather, and now we can slowly add a little bit of tension to these wraps. And again, we're gonna come right up to the base of our bead, and you can see it, just that little bit of movement wants to move that feather already, so don't crank down on that too much. And for our thorax, any color would be okay. Again, we're kind of counting on this orange bead to get attention for us, so what we're looking at now is to keep the normal contrast of natural bug which would be lighter in the abdomen, and then finish a little bit darker in the thorax. And just a quick look before we wrap. Again, we're roughly 1/3 of the usable hook shank that we're utilizing today for the thorax, and then 2/3 for that abdomen. If you hear me say that about 50 more times, it'll be 3-2 view, because that's something you need to keep in mind. So here we've got some Spawn Simi seal, and this is the sand dab or Sculpin color. And we're just gonna get some of that loaded right on. I'm not gonna twist this as tightly as I can, because I want a little bit of a buggier feel to this. And again, we can pick it out after we've wrapped it too. Let's see how it goes. So it's gonna slip that dubbing right up to our shank here and get started. And just make sure you kind of keep this feather out of the way for now as we start. So there's 1 wrap, 2, and we're kind of back already. Just make sure you cover where the wire was trapped and tied off. And now we're coming back toward the bead, and we're gonna finish up right behind, and then we're gonna take this feather back and move 1 wrap in front of the feather, so that as we wrap this, we don't get tangled in our thread. And before we wrap this, I like to move all these fibers, just very, very gently coax them back toward the rear of the fly. And in this way, when we take that first wrap, it's not such a shock on the quill, and we don't lose any fibers. So here we're coming up, and on this type of fly, if you get 1 good wrap in, maybe that's as much movement as you want. And if we get 2 wraps, well, maybe that's as much movement as you want. So I like 2 wraps right there. And once we come up to the top, we're just gonna see this little V here from our fibers that have been wrapped as compared to the stem that we're still holding on to here. Keep that V in mind anytime you're tying off a component, and that thread will slip right into that V. And at this point, you've already created that separation, and now we just have to finish tying off. So there's 1 wrap, 2 wraps, pull down gently, and on the 3rd wrap, I'm gonna pull down just a little bit more aggressively. And again, just like we did coming up to the feather, we're gonna slit that thread in front for a couple wraps. And now when we trim this out, there's nowhere for that quill to move. It can't jump out and it can't jump back. So on this, let's get in there nice and neat. And once I've got this, hopefully you guys can see this a little bit. Trim that out, nothing to it. Now make sure there are no fibers sticking in here over the bead, and if there are not, go ahead and make a few more wraps, and this just solidifies all those fibers that we worked so hard to get in there nice and cute, and it makes for a nice little thread collar there. All right, I'm happy with that. And everybody's favorite thing to do in the world, it's the whip finish time. And again, keep in mind, as we progress on this whip finish, we start near the fibers of our body, and where each wrap is gonna go just a little bit closer to that bead. And if it doesn't, and you stack that thread, your knot doesn't catch, and it'll just slip through itself, and you'll have a loose fly. So there's 1 toward the back, next one is just a little bit forward, and a little bit forward, and forward. So you see by the 4th wrap, I'm actually slipping that thread off the bead to come back to the rest of the wraps. Tug down, let's do that 1 more time. Watch it on the top here. So we've got 1 wrap, 2 wraps that are touching but still moving forward. And we're gonna get 1 more wrap in here, and you can see how it slips off the bead and right into the meat of our neck there. All right, so now our thread and our knot end up on the very bottom. Go ahead and cut cleanly. See how our little bug is looking. It looks pretty buggy. What do you guys think? All that's left now, we're gonna get in here with our bodkin and just gently pick out some of that Simi seal, the sand dab color, or the Sculpin color that we use for the thorax, and just one time around the fly and just gently pick out a couple fibers. And it's just gonna release it just enough to look extra buggy, as though, again, something may be pupating or becoming an adult. And then we're just gonna give it a little bit of Loon hard head cement. We'll be ready to go fishing. Now, when you're tying these up, keep in mind that not only do other colors work, but definitely different sizes that are going to be utilized to match where you're fishing and what the fish are into at that time. So please try this in a few different sizes, but definitely a few different colors as well. One thing that's really beneficial fishing this fly, no matter what season, is this little hot head here, that bead. It seems to really trigger fish's excitement levels. And there we go, just a generic little nymph that will definitely get you into some fish. And again, pick that out until it makes you completely happy. And there we are. Let's move that up in the vise just a touch and see how that's looking. I like that bug. All right, folks, thanks so much for tying along. Again, this has been Pete here at the Ever Sunny Spawn Fly Fish. And please, it makes a huge difference for the entire world, but go ahead and hit like and follow if you've enjoyed any one part of this video. We'll see you guys soon.